The world of cinema stood still on October 11th, 2025, when Diane Keaton, at the age of 79, took her final breath inside her serene California home. Her passing wasn't just another Hollywood farewell. It felt like the curtain slowly falling on a chapter of American art that could never be rewritten. For millions across generations, she wasn't merely an actress, she was a mirror, one that reflected the tender chaos of being human, the laughter, the loneliness, and the quiet truth that connected us all. Her legacy wasn't built on red carpets or golden gowns. It was built on honesty, the kind that sneaks into your soul and makes you feel seen when life forgets to notice you. Through The Godfather and Annie Hall, Diane Keaton redefined what love, awkwardness, and vulnerability looked like on a screen. She didn't just perform roles, she lived them, transforming imperfection into poetry. Yet, behind that disarming smile and those iconic turtlenecks, she carried sorrow like a secret melody, a rhythm only she could hear. Even at her brightest, there were quiet storms within her that the spotlight could never touch. Her story didn't begin with applause or triumph. It began in silence, the kind that shapes you long before the world learns your name. And when Hollywood's lights dimmed on that October day, they didn't fade because a celebrity had died. They dimmed because one of the last souls who made fame feel human was finally gone. The laughter faded, the applause stopped, and all that remained was the soft echo of her honesty, enduring, fragile, unforgettable. Diane Keaton's childhood unfolded beneath the bright, endless Los Angeles sun, in a household where appearances mattered more than emotions. Born on January 5, 1946, to Jack Hall and Dorothy Diane Keaton Hall, she grew up in a world that prized politeness over truth, where feelings were tucked neatly behind dinner prayers and smiles were worn like armor. Her father, Jack, was a man of principle, steady but distant. His silence spoke louder than his words. Her mother, Dorothy, once radiant with theatrical dreams, slowly faded into the background of domestic life. Diane, the observant child, noticed it all, how her mother's laughter dimmed, how her eyes seemed to wander somewhere beyond the kitchen walls. She learned early that her mother's joy was often just a performance, a smile rehearsed for guests, not for herself. Watching Dorothy's dreams dissolve into household routine etched a silent vow inside young Diane's heart. She would never surrender her voice to silence. While other girls of the 1950s dreamed of perfect husbands and white picket fences, Diane dreamed of escape, of stages where she could breathe freely, of a life where truth didn't need permission. I grew up in a family that didn't talk about feelings, she once admitted. We simply lived inside them. Those words would later become prophecy. Silence became her first language. Art became her translation. In a home of rules and restraint, she began shaping her defiance, the very defiance that would one day define her. She refused to fade quietly, to vanish like her mother had. Every ache, every quiet disappointment became the raw material of her future art. At just 9 years old, Diane found her first taste of freedom, the intoxicating miracle of being seen. During a high school play, trembling under a single spotlight as Blanche Dubois in a streetcar named Desire, something inside her cracked open. The audience's stillness felt like oxygen. That was the first time I felt seen, she would later say. For Diane, acting wasn't about pretending, it was about survival. It was her way of giving voice to all the words her childhood had buried. After graduation, Diane packed her fragile dreams into a single suitcase and boarded a Greyhound bus bound for New York City, chasing a life where she could finally breathe without judgment. There, she shed the last trace of her old self, dropping Hall and adopting her mother's maiden name. She became Keaton, a name chosen not just for identity, but for defiance. "Every time they say Miss Keaton," she once whispered, "they're saying my mother's name." It was both a tribute and a rebellion, a promise to carry her mother's silenced dreams forward and to give them the voice the world once denied. But the city she entered in 1966 was cold and indifferent. New York didn't care who she was or what she wanted. The wind bit through her thin coat as she trudged to auditions that always ended the same way. Too tall, too odd, not our type. She rented a cramped apartment with peel-in wallpaper and a single flickering bulb. Her meals were tea, stale bread, and whatever hope she could scrape together. Rejection became routine. Hunger became her companion, and loneliness her most persistent audience. The radiator rattled at night instead of warming her. The walls whispered nothing but silence. Yet within that isolation, something fierce began to grow. She started to write letters to herself, to her mother, to the dream that refused to die. "I was afraid all the time," she later admitted, "but fear became my engine." Every no thickened her skin. Every sleepless night sharpened her humor. She walked through snow just to feel movement, whispering to herself, "Not yet." That fear, that fragile persistence, became her crucible. It burned away the weakness and left only truth. The same trembling honesty that would one day define her every role was being forged there, in the quiet misery of those New York winters. Then, in 1968, fate finally turned its gaze toward her. A Broadway revival of Hair was searching for someone raw, unpolished, real. Diane auditioned barefoot, her nerves shaking, but her spirit unyielding. When the director smiled and said, "Don't change a thing," she knew her authenticity had finally been seen as art. That night, beneath the blinding stage lights, she felt something divine awaken inside her. "I built myself out of fear," she would later say, and she meant it. Every tremor became a heartbeat. Every doubt became rhythm. She was no longer a girl running from silence. She was a woman turning it into music. That moment didn't just launch her career, it saved her life. New York hadn't broken her, it had carved her. And from that carving, a true artist was born. By 1972, Diane Keaton's name was starting to travel beyond the New York stage and into the heart of Hollywood. When she was cast as Kay Adams in The Godfather, no one could have predicted how profoundly that role would change her life and cinema itself. Against Al Pacino's brooding Michael Corleone, Diane's quiet strength became the emotional compass of the film. While others saw a mafia saga, she saw something deeper, a story about love, power, and the human cost of silence. Her performance didn't shout for attention. It whispered, and the world listened. That film didn't just make her famous, it made her eternal. "It gave me the voice I had been fighting for," she later said. Through Kay, she gave shape to every woman who had ever stood beside power, loving it, fearing it, and daring to question it. The Godfather's success crowned her as a new kind of a star, one defined not by glamour, but by emotional truth. But on that same set, something else began to unfold. Between scenes and long silences, she found an unexpected connection with Al Pacino, not just as a co-star, but as a kindred soul. Their chemistry was undeniable, And what started as collaboration soon deepened into a quiet, complicated affection. Fame had found her, but it didn't fill her. She was still the same woman who had once whispered, "Not yet," into the cold of New York nights. Even as her career soared, she carried humility like a shield, often bewildered by her own success. Then came Annie Hall in 1977, the role that would etch her name permanently into Hollywood's mythology. The turtlenecks, the laughter, the effortless wit, none of it was a costume. It was Diane, unfiltered. The world didn't just watch Annie Hall, they fell in love with her. The performance redefined what romance could look like on a screen. Imperfect, spontaneous, human. It wasn't a love story drenched in fantasy, it was one grounded in truth. The Academy recognized her brilliance, placing an Oscar in her trembling hands. But when the applause faded and the lights dimmed, she sat alone in her kitchen, staring at that golden statue. "Is this what it feels like to be seen?" she whispered to herself. The question lingered in the air, heavy and haunting. Success had given her everything except peace. She had reached the dream her mother never could, yet the silence that followed sounded achingly familiar. The higher she climbed, the lonelier it became. Every smile hid exhaustion, every joke masked longing. The public saw triumph. Diane felt isolation. And in that fragile balance between adoration and emptiness, she found the paradox that would define her life: to be loved by millions and still feel unseen. After Annie Hall, the world wanted more of Diane Keaton's brilliance, and she gave it at a heavy cost. The glow of fame masked an exhaustion that few could see. She pushed herself past every limit, memorizing lines until dawn, rewriting scenes that no one had asked her to change. "I didn't sleep," she confessed years later. "I was scared to stop." Success, once her salvation, began to feel like a trap. The industry praised her authenticity, yet demanded she be flawless. Every new role came with the silent question: could she ever be as perfect again? She chased perfection like oxygen, terrified that the slowing down would make her vanish. By 1981, when she filmed Reds under Warren Beatty's direction, her emotional reservoir was nearly dry. "I cried in the car after filming," she admitted. "Not because I was sad, because I had nothing left." The applause now sounded hollow. Fame, once electric, had turned cold. Her laughter, once genuine, began to sound rehearsed. A performance even she couldn't believe anymore. She came to understand what few stars ever do. Fame has its own weather: beautiful, brutal, unpredictable. And for a woman who built herself from fear, perfection had become a new kind of prison. Yet even in exhaustion, she never compromised her integrity. That internal war between her brilliance and her burnout became the invisible tragedy behind her smile. The mid-1980s tested her resilience. The box office cooled. Critics grew indifferent. The Little Drummer Girl, 1984, ambitious but misunderstood, faltered both financially and emotionally. The audience that once adored her seemed to look elsewhere. Everyone assumed she was still on top, but inside she was unraveling. So she withdrew, not out of defeat, but out of necessity. Hollywood, hungry for youth and novelty, moved on. But Diane didn't disappear. She retreated. She began turning down million-dollar offers because fame without truth felt meaningless. Instead, she wrote, she directed, she rebuilt. The applause fades, she once told a young actress, but the work saves you. Those words became her compass. Out of solitude, she found peace. Out of silence, she rediscovered creativity. What the world mistook as decline was actually transformation. She was quietly shedding everything that wasn't real. From that stillness, a new Diane Keaton emerged, one who no longer needed validation, only purpose. A woman who found a strength not in red carpets, but in quiet mornings with a camera, a notebook, and her own thoughts. She began painting her life with shadows and light, learning that fulfillment wasn't about attention, it was about meaning. Among all her unforgettable performances, none was more haunting than the one she lived off a screen, her decades-long, quiet, and complicated love story with Al Pacino. They met in 1971 on the set of The Godfather, two artists bound by the same hunger for truth, two souls who understood silence better than words. "I was crazy about him," she later confessed. Their chemistry didn't need declarations. It existed in glances, in laughter, between takes, in the way neither could quite walk away. Their love wasn't built on glamour or headlines. It was born from recognition. The recognition of another lonely spirit who carried the same unspoken ache. Diane dreamed of a simple life together, quiet mornings, shared coffee, belonging. But Pacino, ever brilliant and restless, feared the stillness she craved. "I avoid doors that might lead to pain," he once admitted. Diane, fearless as ever, walked through every one of them. Their story spanned decades, from tender beginnings to years of distance and reunion. It was a love that never truly ended, only changed shape. It wasn't failure, she would later say softly. It was unfinished art. By 1990, during The Godfather, Part 3. Filming in Rome, she believed destiny had come full circle. They stayed in the same villa, dining under Italian skies, laughter echoing through the night. For a moment, it felt like the world had paused for them. Two souls finally aligning after years of orbiting apart. But one evening, as golden light spilled across their balcony table, Diane spoke the words that would end everything. Marriage or goodbye. Her voice trembled, not from anger but from surrender. Pacino couldn't answer. The silence between them became his refusal. Diane understood then that waiting was no longer love, it was self-betrayal. That night, she folded years of hope into a suitcase, scented with regret, and left Rome before dawn. The seat beside her on the plane remained empty, like every unspoken promise between them. That silence broke her in ways no heartbreak before had. It wasn't loud, it didn't shatter, it simply dissolved, leaving behind a hollow space she carried for years. She learned then that not every love story needs an ending. Some just fade into memory, half-written and achingly human. But fate wasn't finished testing her. Only weeks after Rome, her father, Jack Hall, collapsed from a brain tumor. Grief came in pairs, one love lost to distance, another to death. The hospital's sterile hum replaced the music of her laughter. She held his hand and whispered, "Don't go yet, Dad." But he couldn't stay. Losing him felt like losing gravity. After the funeral, the house grew unbearably still. "I broke then," she admitted later. Not loudly, just quietly broke. She stopped answering calls, stopped recognizing her reflection. Her wit turned inward, cutting instead of healing. The silence that once fueled her now suffocated her. Therapy became her final act of survival. Through those sessions, she faced the truth she had long avoided. Love had always been her waiting room, not her home. The losses stripped her bare, but from that emptiness emerged something rare, a strength born from surrender. Diane didn't rise from grief, she rebuilt within it. She stopped waiting for rescue and began building a home inside herself. From ashes, she forged independence, not as armor, but as truth. Solitude, once her greatest fear, became her teacher. She filled her days with small rituals, writing, photography, restoring spaces. The silence that once destroyed me, she wrote, became the space where I learned to breathe. Her pain didn't vanish, it evolved into purpose. For the first time, Diane wasn't performing for anyone. She wasn't chasing approval or applause. She was simply living. And in that stillness, she finally met the person she had been searching for all her life, herself. In her 50s, Diane Keaton stepped into a chapter that would redefine her life more profoundly than any film ever could. When many of her peers were retreating from the spotlight, she was beginning anew, this time not as an actress, but as a mother. In 1996, she adopted her daughter, Dexter. 5 years later, she welcomed her son, Duke. They saved me, she confessed without hesitation. For Diane, love had finally returned, not as romance, but as family. Her home, once echoing with silence, now pulsed with laughter, toys scattered across the floor, and the comforting chaos of bedtime stories. Gone were the late-night rehearsals and sleepless anxieties of her past. She traded scripts for storybooks, fame for fingerprints on the walls, and red carpets for the soft shuffle of little feet running through her house. I used to think I wanted romance, she joked. Turns out, I just wanted family. Through her children, she experienced a love that didn't leave, didn't fade, and didn't ask for anything in return. It wasn't the dramatic kind she once chased. It was steady, healing, and real. Every morning, her home filled with the kind of light no spotlight could replicate. Motherhood didn't erase her solitude, it redefined it. Silence no longer frightened her because it now echoed with belonging. After decades of performing, she had finally found peace in simply being. For the woman who once believed a love had to hurt, motherhood became her redemption, a reminder that love could also heal. As the years passed, her Brentwood home became her sanctuary. She designed it herself, restoring every beam and window with the same devotion she once gave to her art. Friends called it the quiet house. To Diane, it was sacred, a living memory of everything she had learned. Every morning began with tea and journal pages. Every evening ended with laughter, her children's voices mixing with the hum of her loyal dog padding softly through the hall. The house wasn't extravagant, but it was alive. Every wall bore her fingerprints. Every corner whispered gratitude. She once said, "I don't need the world anymore. I just need this, the sound of life in these walls." In that home, surrounded by the scent of lavender and old wood, she found something fame had never given her, peace that didn't need witnesses. Through her years of rebuilding, Diane discovered that beauty could rise from ruins, that healing could be architectural, and that silence, once her greatest fear, could become her closest friend. She had finally learned the truth she'd spent a lifetime chasing, that love, in its purest form, doesn't demand an audience. It simply stays. In her later years, Diane Keaton's world grew quieter, but never smaller. While Hollywood continued to chase youth and a spectacle, she had already stepped beyond its illusions. She no longer needed the lights, the premieres, or the applause, because she had finally built something far greater, a life that was hers alone. Her days flowed like poetry. Mornings began with sunlight spilling through her Brentwood windows, falling across stacks of journals filled with sketches, reflections, and gratitude. Afternoons were for walks through her garden, a sanctuary of sage, lavender, and memory. She spoke to her plants like old friends, whispering, "You're still here, so am I." That house, the one she designed and restored piece by piece, became more than shelter. It was her autobiography written in wood and glass, a reflection of her resilience, her artistry, her refusal to be defeated by time. Every corner told a story of fear turned to courage, of heartbreak turned to healing, of silence turned to song. Visitors often found her in the garden, barefoot, camera in hand, capturing the way morning light kissed the roses. "This," she'd smile softly, "this is what I was always looking for. Not fame, not perfection, just presence." Even as age crept in, Diane remained as luminous as ever, her wit intact, her eyes bright with curiosity. She continued writing, photographing, creating. She called her creativity her form of prayer, the act that kept her spirit awake. In interviews, when asked about the legacy, she would shrug and say, "I don't think about being remembered. I think about being real while I'm still here." And that was her truth. She didn't chase immortality, she lived authenticity. When she passed on that October morning in 2025, the world of cinema fell silent, not because a star had died, but because something deeper had ended. An era of honesty, vulnerability, and imperfection, the kind of art that made humanity feel visible. Fans across the world mourned not just the loss of an actress, but the disappearance of a spirit that reminded them it was okay to be flawed, to be afraid, to feel deeply. Her legacy isn't just on film reels, it's in the countless lives she touched, in the women who saw themselves in her awkwardness, in the dreamers who found a strength in her vulnerability, in anyone who ever dared to be real in a world obsessed with pretending. Diane Keaton didn't conquer Hollywood, she humanized it. Her story wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence, not about fame, but about feeling, not about applause, but about truth. In the end, she left us not with a goodbye, but with a quiet reminder whispered through time. The silence that once broke me became the space where I learned to live. And in that silence, Diane Keaton remains soft, enduring, unforgettable. As the screen fades to black, we are left not with grief, but with gratitude. Diane Keaton's life reminds us that true beauty doesn't come from the spotlight. It comes from surviving the shadows. She was never the loudest voice in the room, but she was always the most honest. Her laughter, her awkward charm, her trembling authenticity, they weren't performances, they were confessions. Through every role, she showed us that it is possible to be broken and still shine, to be afraid and still move forward, to be alone and still complete. In a world that often worships noise, Diane made silence is sacred. In an industry that thrives on perfection, she celebrated imperfection. And in a culture obsessed with youth, she grew older with defiance, humor, and grace. Her story is not about loss, it's about becoming. She didn't leave us, she simply transformed into memory, a quiet echo in every scene where truth dares to breathe. So tonight, as we remember her, the woman in the hat, the smile behind the uncertainty, the artist who turned fear into poetry, let us honor her the only way she would have wanted, not with tears, but with authenticity. Because if Diane Keaton taught us anything, it's that the bravest thing you can ever be is yourself. This was her truth, her art, her legacy. If you believe her story deserves to be remembered, share her light, like comment, and subscribe to join us as we continue uncovering the untold stories of Hollywood's most human legends. Because sometimes the greatest performances aren't found on screen. They're found in the quiet, unspoken moments that make life worth living.